In the blazing heart of Wasit, what the outside world called Thebes, the royal palace of Pharaoh Senur towered with columns of painted stone and courtyards bathed in golden light. Queen Ankhesenamun stood high on her balcony, wrapped in linen as fine as mist, her face framed by braids adorned with turquoise beads, her gaze far from the courtly duties unfolding below. Down in the palace courtyard stood Ramose, a new guard among many, yet striking in his quiet stillness. Tall, sharp-featured, and cloaked in discipline, he watched the queen not with fear or desire, but something far more dangerous wonder. And she noticed, his gaze was not the groveling submission of others. It was clean, silent, and bold. That glance did not speak, but it said everything. Later that evening, during the festival of Hathor, music swirled like incense and dancers spun beneath torchlight. The queen, draped in ceremonial gold, was expected to watch from her throne, but instead she disappeared behind a curtain of papyrus pillars. Ramose stood there in the shadows, and when she appeared, the air grew heavy with unspoken truth. "You shouldn't look at me that way," she said softly, her voice sharper than the edge of a blade. Ramose didn't bow. "Then why did you come to tell me?" The silence that followed burned brighter than fire. No promises were made, no confessions spilled, but both knew something had begun. A queen and a guard, a woman born of divine blood and a man of sand and steel, now tethered by something neither had named. Above them, the gods stirred in uneasy silence. For in ancient Egypt, love was not merely forbidden, it was fate's sharpest blade. And what began with a single glance would one day bring down the pillars of power. Because sweet things always demand a price. The sun rose slow and heavy over the palace of Wasit, but its golden light could not burn away the unease that had settled like dust on every stone. Ankhesenamun sat beneath the high ceiling of the Hall of Offerings, surrounded by statues of gods who watched her with hollow, painted eyes. Her fingers gripped the handle of a carved goblet, the date wine inside untouched. Around her, the laughter of her ladies-in-waiting felt distant, hollow, like echoes from a world she no longer belonged to. Her thoughts were on Ramose the guard, who had not lowered his eyes, who had spoken to her not as a subject, but as an equal. She felt the weight of last night like a secret tattooed on her skin. The walls of the palace, she knew, had ears, and secrets here did not remain secret for long. At the gate of the southern courtyard, Ramose stood motionless, his posture perfect, but his thoughts anything but still. He remembered the curve of her voice, the tension in the air, the knowledge that something dangerous had been born in that single encounter. He knew he should fear it. He also knew he would not walk away from it. That afternoon, an aged eunuch named Beck, who had served the palace longer than most had lived, approached the queen. His voice was dry as papyrus. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low, "the walls here listen, and they whisper." Ankhesenamun did not meet his eyes. "Then let them speak," she said, her voice quiet but unshaken. That night, under a sky littered with stars, she returned to the same colonnade. Ramose was there. No messages passed between them. No guard summoned him, but he came. "I should leave," he whispered. "But you won't," she replied. The silence between them deepened, and not far away, behind painted screens and woven curtains, someone else was listening. Within the quiet labyrinth of the palace, where moonlight touched alabaster floors and torchlight danced on golden walls, something stirred beyond Ankhesenamun's knowing. A figure moved through the corridors like a serpent in reeds, silent, watchful, calculating. Vizier Menkau, the pharaoh's most trusted advisor, had seen the queen slip away during the festival, and he had seen the guard, Ramose, disappear moments later. He had served too many rulers not to recognize the scent of danger. A queen with secrets was a storm waiting to happen. He said nothing that night, but his mind locked the pieces into place like a priest sealing a tomb. If Ankhesenamun broke sacred order, it would be Menkau who would be called upon to restore it no matter the cost. Meanwhile, the queen sat before her mirror, her maid combing her dark braids with oils and herbs. But Ankhesenamun saw none of it. Her thoughts spiraled toward Ramose, the way his voice had trembled. Not with fear, but restraint. The way he looked at her as though she were not a queen, but a woman. A part of her long buried beneath crowns and rituals had stirred. It frightened her, but it also set her aflame. Ramose, too, lay awake in the guard's quarters, his mind repeating every word, every glance. He was no fool. He knew the risk. One wrong step, and he'd vanish beneath the palace stones like so many before him. But still, he could not forget her. In the shadows, Vizier Menkau summoned a servant. "Follow them. Watch. Listen. Report only to me." The servant bowed and vanished into the night. The game had begun. In the silence of their stolen moments, neither Ankhesenamun nor Ramose knew they were already being hunted. In a palace of gods and gold, even love had eyes watching. The next few days passed like a slow-moving shadow, long and heavy across the palace grounds. Ankhesenamun fulfilled her royal duties with a painted smile, offering blessings to the priests of Amun, overseeing temple donations, and walking beside Pharaoh Senyor during processions. But her heart was no longer in the chambers of the court. It was in the quiet places, the hidden corridors, the stolen glances. She had memorized the paths less traveled, where shadows clung to the stone and no footsteps echoed. There, beneath the weight of carved gods and sacred oaths, she met Ramose. No words were exchanged in daylight, but every night, their silence became a story only they understood. Ramose had never felt fear like this. Not on the battlefield, not in the training yard. But fear could not match what he felt when he saw her. Her presence was both punishment and reward, both a sin and a sanctuary. She was forbidden, yes, but she was also his truth in a world built on lies. Their meetings grew bolder, a whisper here, a soft touch there, always hidden beneath the palace's breath. And all the while, the servant sent by Menkau followed in silence, eyes sharp, heart cold. One night, in a forgotten courtyard where a fig tree had cracked the tiles with its roots, Ankhesenamun leaned into Ramose and whispered, "I was a girl when they gave me to the pharaoh. I became queen, but I was never free, until now." Her voice trembled not from fear but from release. Ramose held her hand, calloused and warm, and replied, "Then I will protect this freedom, even if it costs me everything." But stone remembers, and the palace, carved by gods and ruled by kings, had no place for love born in darkness. The roots were growing, and so was the danger. Pharaoh Senyor, though aged and weary from decades on the throne, was no blind man. He ruled with patience, but he had long understood that danger rarely arrived with spears. It came with whispers, with glances held too long. And lately, the palace was too quiet. His queen smiled too softly. His guard, Ramose, looked too far beyond his post. The old lion stirred. In the Hall of Judgment, where nobles bent the knee and generals brought news of the borders, Senor summoned Vizier Menkau. "Something stirs beneath my roof," the pharaoh said, voice low but sharp. "It slithers in shadow. Find it." Menkau bowed, his heart heavy with satisfaction. "Yes, my pharaoh," he answered. The vizier had already collected pieces, servants' gossip, candle wax where it should not be, footprints in the dust of unused corridors. Now he would gather the rest. His trap was nearly complete. Meanwhile, Ankhesenamun sat alone in the queen's garden, her fingers tracing the petals of a lotus. A gift from Ramose lay hidden beneath her cloak, a tiny carved scarab made of lapis lazuli. He had crafted it with his own hands. No palace artisan involved. She clutched it like a secret prayer. But as she sat beneath the blooming myrrh tree, she didn't notice the servant behind the lattice wall, watching through a slit just wide enough to witness her tears. Ramose, unaware of the tightening noose, began to dream not just of moments stolen in darkness, but of escape. "Let us leave this place," he told her one night. "Let us cross the Nile, vanish into the deserts where no name matters." Ankhesenamun wanted to say yes. Her lips almost formed the word. But the gods were already awake. The pharaoh's eyes had opened, and the price of disobedience in Egypt was always blood. Beneath the grand pillars of the palace, where murals of Horus and Isis gazed down with eternal judgment, Menkau's plan began to move like a crocodile beneath the reeds, slow, patient, deadly. The servant who had followed the queen now stood before the vizier, head bowed, voice shaking. "They meet in the west courtyard, beneath the fig tree, at night." Menkau nodded once. That was all he needed. He dismissed the servant with a wave and turned toward the chamber where guards loyal not to Pharaoh but to the vizier himself stood waiting. "Tonight," he whispered, "we end this treason." Ramose, unaware of the snare tightening around him, stood with Ankhesenamun in the temple ruins beyond the queen's chambers. The torches had been extinguished, the guards diverted. Only the moon watched them now, and even she seemed reluctant. "I will speak to Pharaoh," she whispered, eyes wet. "I will tell him I was never his, that my heart has always been my own." Ramose took her hands, his voice cracked with both fear and love. "He will not forgive. They will not forgive." Ankhesenamun shook her head. "Then let history curse me, but let it be my choice." But choices had already been made for them. That night, as the queen and the guard embraced beneath the fig tree, the guards of Menkau stormed in like jackals. Ankhesenamun screamed. Ramose reached for his blade, but a spear struck him in the shoulder, and he fell, blood soaking into the sacred soil. The queen was dragged away, her cries echoing through the corridors like a wail of the gods themselves. In his chamber, Menkau bowed before the pharaoh. "We have found the serpent in your garden, my king." And Pharaoh Senior, his face stone, simply said, "Then let judgment fall like sand through the fingers of Ra." The next morning, the palace awoke not to songs or sunrises, but to silence, a silence so thick even the birds refused to sing. Ankhesenamun was dragged through the halls by guards who once bowed to her, their faces hard, their eyes avoiding hers. Her wrists were bound in golden cord, not as a mark of honor, but as mockery, like a jewel. Shackled to disgrace. In the hall of Ma'at, where justice was weighed like feathers, Pharaoh Senior sat upon his throne of lapis and ivory. Ramose lay at the foot of the dais, wounded but alive, forced to kneel, his shoulders still bleeding. The court gathered. Priests, nobles, and servants all packed the room, eyes wide with hunger for judgment, for gossip, for the fall of those once untouchable. Menkau stepped forward first, a serpent in silk. "Your Majesty, the Queen has betrayed the gods, the throne, and your sacred bed. She has lain with a guard, a man of dust. The gods demand purity, and now they demand retribution." Ankhesenamun lifted her chin. Her voice, when she spoke, was like steel wrapped in velvet. "I have served this crown since I was a girl. I was given to a king, but I never gave him my heart. I gave that to the only man who ever looked at me as more than a symbol. If that is treason, then I stand guilty." Gasps rippled through the hall. Ramose, bloody and broken, met her eyes with pride. He spoke only once. "I do not regret loving her." The pharaoh's face did not change, but something in his eyes dimmed, rage, sorrow, or shame. No one could tell. Then he stood, raised his golden staff, and said, "In Egypt, law is older than kings. Let them both be judged." A heavy silence fell. The gods would have their verdict soon. In the palace courtyard, where Nile lilies bloomed and incense once floated through the air like prayer, two prisoners now knelt beneath the open sky. Ankhesenamun, her royal paint faded, her robes torn and smeared with dust, looked not like a queen, but a woman stripped of every title, except the one that mattered, lover. Beside her, Ramose sat upright despite his wounds, defiant as ever, his eyes fixed not on the crowd that had gathered to watch, but on the sun overhead, as if pleading his case to Ra himself. From the balcony above, Pharaoh Senior stood, flanked by high priests and Menkau, whose eyes glittered with triumph. A hush fell as the pharaoh spoke. "The gods have seen your crime. You, Ramose, a common guard, touched what is sacred. You, Ankhesenamun, a queen of divine blood, broke covenant with the gods. But your honesty has reached their ears. I shall not end your lives, but I shall end what bound them." He raised his staff and pointed to the desert. "Ramose shall be led to the black sands, a land of silence where no man returns. And Ankhesenamun shall be confined to the inner temple, forbidden from stepping beyond its walls until her final breath. So let the gods be satisfied." Cries broke out among the crowd. Some gasped in sympathy, others whispered in fear. Ankhesenamun looked at Ramose. "Even if I never see the sun again, I saw it once in your eyes," she said, voice steady. Ramose smiled through the blood on his lips. "And if I die in exile, I die knowing I lived for something greater than myself." They were torn apart by guards, dragged in opposite directions. No last embrace, no kiss goodbye, only the wind to carry the love they could no longer speak. The sentence was passed. But fate had not yet spoken its final word. The inner temple, hidden deep within the sacred heart of Waset, was a place where no voice dared rise above a whisper. Once reserved for the holiest of priestesses, it now held Ankhesenamun, a queen without a throne, a woman without a world. Day after day, she walked its shadowed corridors, her fingers trailing the cool stone walls, her soul caged behind eyes that no longer wept. The chants of priests echoed faintly beyond the columns, but none dared speak to her. Her punishment was not death, it was forgetting, to be unseen, unheard, untouched. Her name, once sung in hymns, now forbidden from scrolls. Yet each night, she carved a tiny mark into the pillar beside her resting mat, one for every day since Ramose had been taken. A quiet rebellion, a reminder she still lived. Far across the desert, beyond the dunes that shimmered like flame, Ramose stumbled through exile. The black sands were cruel, endless heat by day, bone-cracking cold by night. Scorpions, snakes, and worse creatures of myth roamed the windswept rocks. But Ramose refused to die. He drank from shallow wells, slept beneath crumbling ruins, and whispered her name like prayer. Ankhesenamun. Each day, he etched her name into stone with a flint knife, just as she marked hers in silence. Though miles apart, they clung to the same ritual of remembrance. Back in Wasit, Vizier Menkau grew uneasy. Despite their separation, the queen not broken, her defiance lived in silence, stronger than any sword. Even the gods forget in time, he muttered. But it was not the gods he feared, it was the power of love that would not die, the kind that buried itself like a seed in the sands, waiting to rise again. And in the dark, something indeed was beginning to rise. Seasons passed like shadows across the sands. Years carved lines upon Ankhesenamun's face. But her spirit remained untouched. Her beauty now something deeper etched by pain, preserved by memory. Within the walls of the inner temple, the priests grew older and slower, and the guards came to fear her silence more than her words. She spoke rarely, but when she did, even the torches seemed to lean in to listen. Her daily marks on the pillar continued, now numbering in the thousands. She had not seen Ramose again, but in her heart, he had never left. Far beyond the reach of kings, Ramose had become a myth among desert traders. They spoke of a ghost in the black sands, a man who walked barefoot beneath the burning sky, whose eyes glowed with purpose. He had survived what no man should. He had built a shelter from bones and broken stone, planted herbs in the crevices of cliffs, and waited, not for rescue, for the right moment. That moment came with a storm. A sandstorm, unlike any in living memory, swept across Wasit, tearing through banners, toppling statues. In the chaos, the palace guards were scattered. The inner temple gates, untouched for over a decade, were battered open. When the dust cleared, the queen was gone. Whispers spread. Some said she had vanished into the storm. Others claimed the gods had taken her. But far beyond the Nile, on the edge of a forgotten oasis, two figures stood beneath a flowering acacia tree. A woman in faded linen, her eyes brighter than the sun, and a man with a scarred shoulder and a soul still burning. No longer queen, no longer guard, just Ankhesenamun and Ramose. Together again, not in palaces of stone, but under skies where no one ruled but love.